What's the password? Welcome to the Game Master's Speakeasy. Brought to you by the record button.
Hello and welcome to the Game Master Speakeasy. I am but one of your hosts, Cody, joined by...
I'm Lance.
This is Lance, everybody. Now, this is going to be an episode where I'm excited to finally answer our first email from a viewer.
We've been asking for an email. We got one.
We got one. Yeah, so I'm pretty stoked about it, but first, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well.
Is that it? That's
Yep,
it?
I mean, that's
I don't know why I was
it's been a
expecting
busy
more.
day. I had
All
a
right.
little bit of work to do today before I got here and stuff like that. But I mean, all things said and done, I can't complain.
All right. Well, I myself, I was, right before we were showing up to recording, I was wrestling with my 3D printer. I got my Z-axis, or my home spot for the plate was apparently wrong, and whenever your thing starts making a horrible grinding noise on your $200 piece of...
pushing down too far?
Yeah, pushing down too far, so that's always fun. But first, a spot of news. I don't have a lot of news today, but I do have one interesting thing. Lance, you are just a little bit older than me. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. So are you familiar with a band originating from the 90s called Faith No More?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, I wanted to share with you that there is an official, on Kickstarter, Faith No More RPG.
Okay. What is the premise here?
I still can't quite figure it out. I have read through the Kickstarter. Don't get me wrong, I like this band. But I have read through the Kickstarter, and here's a short blurb from the Kickstarter itself. It's The Real Thing, which is the name of one of their albums. I think it might have been their first album. Is a self-contained, story-driven pen and paper tabletop role-playing game inspired by the music of Faith No More. Essentially, I suppose specifically the album is from 1989, entitled The Real Thing. They basically take the concept from the album and try to turn it into an RPG adventure, I think, is the goal. It's like a concept RPG.
Okay,
I kind of like in the same way that Morkborg is a metal, a dark heavy metal, black metal fantasy game. This kind of seems like it's using Powered by the Apocalypse, so I have to guess that maybe there's like an apocalypse in the 90s. I don't know. I can't quite, after reading the whole Kickstarter page, figure out what is going to go on, but it's going to revolve around their music.
Well, see, here's the thing. Now I want to go listen to that album and see if there's like a theme or a story to it that would otherwise translate into a good tabletop. Because, I mean, maybe somebody was listening to it and was like, holy buckets, this album tells a story. You could totally, like, make a universe out of this, and then did.
Speaking of albums telling a story, when's the Coheed and Cambria RPG coming out? So, yeah, right now that Kickstarter is live. As of recording, there's still nearly a month to go on it, but, God, we're recording so far out, who knows? This might be out around the same time the Kickstarter is ending, but still, you should go check it out, because... even if it's not new news, it's news to somebody.
Well, if you're a fan of the band, I would imagine there's got to be something in there for you.
Yeah. So that's there's a couple there's more news that I want to I don't know, kind of gloss over just a little bit. Like there's I'm gonna rant about it next episode, but there's a release from WizKids.
Uh-huh.
And they have...
I think they owned the rights to Shadowrun after FASA before it ended up in Catalyst hands.
WizKids did?
I think WizKids did. I don't remember which edition it was. Probably third.
Okay. Anyway, there's so you know that they put out miniatures. WizKids does. They put out a lot of like peripherals. There's the ones at the local comic book shop that there's just primed and ready to go in the blister packages.
Okay.
On the racks. That's by WizKids. Those miniatures are put out by them. But for the first time, they're putting out D&D miniatures on sprues. Do you know what a sprue is?
Yeah, it's the things when you're printing them out.
Yep.
Usually file those things off.
The injection mold plastic.
Yeah.
They the sheets of miniatures that like Warhammer things come on, and they have injection mold plastic sprue. I think it's polystyrene plastic. D&D miniatures on sprues, and they're called WizKids Frameworks. And I'm interested in getting a hold of them to see if they are higher quality than the Nolzur's line.
Okay.
But after,
Oh.
I'll talk more about it next episode.
Okay,
I don't want to rant about it right now.
Then we'll talk about it next episode.
That's going to be a different thing. But that's something else that's new. As someone who is, I don't know, I'd grade myself in the like upper or middle novice tier of miniature painters. You know,
You're better at it than I am.
I'm better at it than you are. So I'm better. I would say I have enough confidence in it to say that I'm better at it than other novices. But I would still place myself in the lower bracket.
Nobody's going to pay you to paint their minis for them.
Heck no. I'm not taking any commissions anytime soon. All right, but that's all I've got for news for now. So what if you would tell me, have we done recently?
Probably the most prominent thing is we started a Call of Cthulhu campaign.
We did start Call of Cthulhu, and we can talk about it now, that we've run a couple sessions. And why don't you tell me your experience of Call of Cthulhu so far? Eventually we'll do a whole episode on it, but what are your first impressions as a player, having run, we've done 2 sessions
We did
now?
2 sessions, yeah.
2 sessions.
Character creation and then 2 sessions
First, tell us
after that.
about character creation. How did you enjoy that?
Character creation I like. It's pretty numbers driven at the end of the day, like how you get your stats and stuff like that. But since it's such a heavy role playing game where combat doesn't take as big a precedent, I think it gives you, there's a lot of skills in there that are kind of unique to that you're putting together for. I didn't find it to be overly complicated. I kind of like the monetary system because it doesn't really require you to like count your dimes and nickels and stuff like that. It's more of this is your general amount of wealth. Because of that, you can spend this amount of money per day, and you can have this amount of money in assets. It works really well to keep the role playing flowing without having to worry about those kind of details. So I really enjoyed that. From a game feel perspective, I always worry about horror games, and we've talked about this a little bit in the previous sessions. Trying to capture a sense of horror in a tabletop game just sometimes can be really difficult, especially if you can't get the group to take things seriously. I think so far everybody's been pretty good. We've had our fair amount of jokes, and we're enjoying it in the same levity that we do other games. But like, there was a specific scene that happened to my character in was it the first session actually. And to understand this, you kind of have to understand how the push rolls work in this game. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so the way push rolls work, and there's multiple systems that use push rolls. The Call of Cthulhu system being one of them. Most of the systems by Free League Publishing do this, where if you fail a roll, you can push a roll where it basically allows, in some form of another, reroll. I think in certain systems, you can push a certain number of dice. In this one, you just re-roll. But in Call of Cthulhu, it represents a furthering attempt. So, for instance, if you're trying to trail someone through a misty, foggy street in the 1920s, and you're trying to trail them, and you fail your stealth roll, you might say, "Oh, I duck behind the dumpster," as a further effort.
Mm-hmm. Or you can use another skill in an attempt to push the roll.
You could use a different skill to push the roll in Call of Cthulhu.
Which, a good example of that would be, let's say you're trying to persuade somebody and you fail, and you decide you want to switch to intimidation.
Oh yeah, that represents
they're not listening to reason, so you decide that, okay, fine, then I'm going to threaten you to get what I want.
So if you push a roll and then you still fail it, essentially the rules tell the keeper, which is what they call the referee
Game
in Call
master.
of Cthulhu. The keeper has carte blanche, free reign to just push the horror and take control of the situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that the player fails, but the keeper has free reign to make the situation go the way they want. If a player opts to push the roll and then fails, you can decide to do whatever you want, and you still might provide the players a win, but it's probably going to come at a cost. That's a good way to push up the creepiness. So when you were
Dial up the weird.
Yeah, tell me what happened in your situation, Lance. Your character who is a burglar.
Okay, broad brushstrokes here. Our party is kind of investigating collectively, a bunch of us from different backgrounds, a series of disappearances and at least one murder that have all occurred kind of in the same area of what's the name of the city we're in?
Arkham.
Arkham, duh.
Yeah, it's
Jesus.
right in Arkham, which
Yeah.
is a creation of
So
in the Cthulhu mythos.
Yes.
A very prominent city.
So we're in Arkham, and my burglar, he decides to go down to the Wharf District, which is where the disappearances have been happening, and it's where the murder occurred. And most of the disappearances had, up until that point, I think there was one guy that disappeared, but we found him later, had been young women. So my guy, he goes down there, and, you know, if you don't know the context of what he's doing, this comes off as really creepy, but basically he's watching as these women in downtown are heading toward the Harbor District, and one of them heads that direction, and he is following her quietly in the shadows using his burglary-based skills to not be seen, predominantly because he's hoping to either keep her safe or at least find out what it is that is committing these acts.
Right.
Not because he has any ill intent toward her. Not that she would know that, but, you know. So I end up after a series of rolls, I follow her, we find the Speakeasy, she goes to the Speakeasy, and then she leaves and she goes back down the Harbor District. I continue to follow her in an attempt, again, to make sure that either she makes it to where she's going safely or to find out what it is that's creeping around down here. I fail my stealth roll, I go ahead and push the roll, and I fail again. I love this system because I kind of want to fail sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Because things got weird. So as I am, you know, going through the alleyways and making my way along the streets, keeping out of sight of this lady in the dead of night, I fail my roll, I fail my push roll, and all of a sudden this fog rolls in to the Harbor District. I lose track of her. First, I can still hear her, but I can't see her. And then eventually she gets far enough away that I can't even hear her anymore. And then all of a sudden, I can hear in the fog somewhere behind me, something is walking. But it's got like a weird gait to it where it's like step, and then there's like a scraping noise.
Oh, yes.
And of course...
If that doesn't give you Pyramid Head vibes, I don't know what will.
So here I am, and I am by myself. I have abandoned the rest of the party. I have split the group in an attempt to at least contribute to the solving of this murder utilizing the skills that I have, because honestly everybody else has low enough stealth they would have drugged me down anyway. But, you know, trying to do my thing. And now I'm stuck in the mist in an area where people have either been murdered or vanished with something stalking me. Fortunately for the lad that I'm playing, he did survive. I never actually encountered the thing. But I will tell you, Cody did a really good job of dialing up the creepy vibes. I felt very alone, very horrified, and very scared for my character.
I think it really helps that it's a system where your character is pretty vulnerable.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
you don't level up, you've had 10 HP. It's probably going to stay 10 HP for the entirety of that character's lifespan.
It's only ever going to be 10 HP or less, and
right.
less is not what I want, so...
Yeah. And then on top of that, there's sanity rolls and things like that.
I think it kind of gives you the same vibe as you know, within the last decade or so, maybe a little longer than that, we've seen this kind of rash of like video games that are horror genre video games where you don't really have a good, effective means of defending yourself.
Oh, yeah, like
and
Amnesia.
Yeah, it's not to say that Call of Cthulhu doesn't provide you with weapons if you need it. My guy's pretty handy with a knife, and he knows how to use a gun. But some of the things that you're going to be going up against in Call of Cthulhu, I'm guessing that a knife or a gun is not going to be a terribly effective weapon against some kind of cosmic horror or cosmic horror-related thing.
You can guess all you want.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and he's not telling me. But my point is that I don't feel like in D&D, if you run into a monster, you feel like, depending on your level and its level, you've got a chance at killing it. When we talk about, like, the kind of things in Call of Cthulhu, my base assumption is that as a human, I'm screwed. Like that,
especially a lone human.
Yes, exactly. As a lone human, I don't know what this thing is, but I know that I don't want to fight it. And that helps to dial up that creepy factor. So I really enjoyed that encounter, and honestly, I look forward to failing more push rolls.
That's good. See, that just goes to show that failure can drive the story forward, so you should embrace the suck.
I mean, that was my failure was my favorite moment in that session. I was like, oh man, I sucked, and everything got so much more fun because of it.
So you got most of it down. From the game master or the keeper's perspective, what I really like about push rolls is it gives me an opportunity to flex the improv muscle. Because
you never know when we're going to fail a push roll,
I
so
never
you
know
can't
when
really
you're gonna-
prepare for it.
Right. It's a game that really forces you to be pretty prepared to improv what's going to happen next. And the game is going to shine more because of it if you are... the better you get at it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The more you can roll with the punches and not railroad things and come up with things on the fly, Call of Cthulhu is a game that can get really neat.
I look forward to it, and just so the listeners are all aware, it is a very heavy role-playing game. You're not going to see a lot of combat. We've done 2 sessions now, still no combat. That's a good thing for our survival.
Yeah, and so look forward to maybe us talking about an entire episode on this system later.
I would dig it.
For what we will talk about next, Lance, this is a speakeasy. So for those of you that are age appropriate, whether you be 21 or older in the United States or in many European countries, 18 or older, or heck, I mean, I don't know, was it like 14 in certain European countries or something like that?
I'm pretty sure there's still places in the world where if you're tall enough to see over the bar, they'll serve you.
So yeah, as long as you're age appropriate, not breaking the law, why don't you saddle up to the bar and get a adult beverage from today's bartender, Bartholomew. And Lance, what are we drinking today?
Well, I brought for us a fruited kettle sour from a local brewery called Single Speed Brewing. It is called Can in the Sand. This is one of their newer ones. It's got a...
It says limited release on it.
This is a limited release too, so I think the other one that I have in my bag today is also a limited release. But this one, it's got pineapple, coconut, mango, and vanilla flavors. It is a sour if you're into sours. I like it because despite the fact that it is a fruited sour, none of the fruits and none of the flavors that I just listed are terribly dominant.
They don't. They don't push one of each. They don't push one another.
No,
out of the way.
it tastes like a really good even sour, and you can taste hints of all those flavors, but none of them are punching you in the face. It's not a mango sour, even though there's mango in it.
To use miniature painting terms, it feels like you've layered with pineapple, coconut, and mango, and then you did a glaze of vanilla over top of it to kind of blend them together.
Yeah, it's a good sour. My wife very specifically enjoyed it. We actually went to the brewery yesterday,
and it is appropriate because it kind of gives you the weather is starting to warm up here, and it gives just the art on the can, the taste, and the weather all kind of fit together right now. I'm excited for a productive summer of role-playing inside a basement. All right, so I would say that this beer is definitely worth drinking at the gaming table. I would probably drink this for the beach episode.
Yeah, we can get more of it. It's limited release, but they still got it.
This would go really well on a pirate-themed campaign, I would say. Very appropriate. Which is, something that we do, but so maybe that's a little bit of a bias. All right, so for today's open topic, or the primary discussion that we're going to have today. By the way, if you haven't figured it out, I didn't mention it earlier like I usually do. We like to talk about tabletop role-playing games. Welcome to the podcast. Today's primary topic is going to be an answering of an email that we got from one of our viewers.
Shout out to Chris.
Yes, Chris, thank you for reaching out with your question. Basically, I won't read the whole thing, but I'm going to sum it up. Chris does have experience running tabletop games.
Yeah, said he had a couple of years of experience.
Yeah, a couple of years of experience, which I'm that's not too far below me. I mean, I've been doing it 5 now.
Yeah.
I guess it's half a decade. Yeah. Depends on how you frame it. Percentage-wise, it's still a lot less than you. Right?
Yeah, well,
but it's a very important question because when you're starting to learn a new system, there is a lot of rules to take in. And Chris wanted to know if we had any advice on learning systems and, more importantly, retaining the knowledge, which is, rule memorization. Mm-hmm. And I will start off by saying that to try and memorize an entire system is definitely a fool's errand. That's why Game Master screens exist. Mm-hmm. So my first thing is, well, do you have any specific things that you do? Because I know that I'll start and let you think of it.
All right, go for it.
I've taken a page out of other dudes I've seen online where when I first go through a book, I try to read it front to back, or at the very least, read all the rules sections front to back, because sometimes I don't care about the lore. Mm-hmm. You know, I often will use my own homebrew setting for whatever game we're running. So, you know, in Pathfinder, we're not playing in Galarian. In D&D, we did play in Forgotten Realms, but there's a whole wiki for that, so I don't need to read the book stuff unless I need to. I try to read through all the rules sections twice. The first time that I do it, I don't take any notes. I kind of skim it, honestly. Like, I read through, and I don't spend a lot of time rereading if I didn't understand anything, because when I'm going through a rule book for the first time to learn a system, there's a lot of things that they say in the earlier parts of the book that don't make sense until you've read other rules.
Yep.
Right? So you've got rules that reference other rules, so it's hard to actually have it click in one's mind until you've kind of got at least a base understanding of everything that's going on. So I'll give the whole book a read through. And so, you know, to start, learning a rule system does take work.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's going to take some time.
It takes work and time, which is, you know, not always fun, but it can be very interesting, if not fun.
The more you play it, the easier it's going to get. Like, you're gonna repeat the same rules time over time, and eventually you're going to get to the point where they stick.
Oh yeah, eventually. Well, hopefully. And and if you don't, you can always keep notes.
Yep.
You can always keep well, I'll get to that later. But the second time I read through the rules notes, I like to take notes. Like, I read through the rules, and on the second read through, after I've kind of had a glimpse of everything that's going on in the system, I will I've got really crappy handwriting, so I will usually make a Word document.
Type it up. Yep.
But whether you have access to a computer or not, maybe you take notes with a pencil and paper. That's fine. But take notes on the things that you think are the most important rules, or the ones that you think you're going to have a hard time remembering. Because when you write something out, whether it be via keyboard or pencil and paper, it helps to commit it to memory.
Yeah.
You know, that's why in school they tell you to take notes, is because by the act of actually processing that information, there are, and don't get me wrong, I'm no neurologist, but, you know, you're always taught that those centers of the brain are more, excuse me, there's one for the producer. Pardon me, good sir. So as you're going through so go through those rules and take notes, because taking notes does help with memorization. Sure. I will say that it's something that you can focus on if a player is playing a certain class. Take notes on that class. If you have a player who is notorious for not remembering things, focus on that class. There are some players in the party you can expect to help you out with these things. Yeah. How about you getting a word in edgewise before I keep ranting about it? No,
I mean, you're actually parroting a lot of the things that I would have said.
So do you have anything to supplement directly on topic?
Yeah, I mean, I also tend to read through the books twice. That's like step one.
Yeah.
It helps if your players can know their stuff, because they're going to be able to help you. Taking notes, again, as Cody reiterated, that tends to lock things in. Now, I prefer to type, because like you, I can't read my own handwriting, but I found that when I handwrite notes, I tend to memorize them better.
Right. Yeah, I would say that there is something about handwriting.
And so, I mean, if you're taking notes to lock it into your brain, not to reference the notes, probably handwriting might be a little bit better.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. At the end of the day, you're not going to memorize the entire book front to back, no matter how hard you try, unless you have, a photographic memory.
And that's why Game Master screens exist.
Yeah, Game Master screens help. The notes are going to help. But I think one of the things that you need to do is, if you have a baseline understanding of the kind of kernel from which the rules spawn from, the basic ideas behind the rules, if you have to fudge something, that's okay, but make a note to yourself to look the rule up after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because even if you do it 3 or 4 times before you finally get it, if you force yourself to go back and look that rule up, then you're going to eventually remember it.
Yes.
If nothing else, because your brain's going to get tired of you having to go back and look it up every time. It's going to dedicate it.
And that's true. That is, I can tell you right now that there have been multiple instances where I have had to relook the same rule up, either because it didn't come up one session after another, and I had to, improv on the fly. And that's always part of your decision as the game master, whether or not to fudge a rule, or I should say, I shouldn't even. I don't think we should even use the word fudge, but to make an arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you are the one who is in charge of running the game, so it's you're judge, jury, and executioner in this regard. So you've made a ruling on it, and you will look up what the game developer said later to keep the game running. And I think we've probably talked about this before. If it's a dramatic, important story moment, then maybe you make the call to say, hey, we're going to crack the book open. But at the end of the day, hopefully your players empathize and understand this exact same mentality. Because in order to keep the game running, most of the time, it's better, honestly, to do exactly what Lance said and make a ruling, but also make a note and say, hey, we'll look up what the actual one says at the end of the session.
Yeah. Now, to put an asterisk to that, if you are in a moment that could like legitimately turn, like say you're playing combat, and this is the kind of thing where the action being taken could turn the combat for or against your players in a very bad way, the kind of bad way where characters end up dying or you end up with a TPK. There's no reason at that point to not say, hold on, I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. Because it's, as a player, it's the kind of thing where if you get killed because of a bad ruling your GM made, it doesn't feel great.
No, it does not.
And so if it's going to be one of those life or death moments, if it's going to be the kind of thing that is going to drastically swing the flow of combat for, especially against the players, but I mean even for the players in some cases, you know, it might be worth taking a 5-minute break to just look the rule up. But if it's not one of those moments, if it's a moment where no matter how you rule, it's not going to really destroy anything, then just make a note for yourself. Just say, hey, go back and look this up after the fact.
Yeah, and know that every game master makes mistakes.
Yeah, I'm scatterbrained as hell. So, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I usually, especially with new systems, have to go back and look stuff up all the time.
Ever since I was very young, let's say about third grade, fourth grade, or something like that. I promise you this is related.
No, I'm waiting to hear it.
I have always kind of had an anxiety in regards to making mistakes and failure that would prevent me from trying something. And over time, I've had to kind of cross over this hurdle, and I still struggle with it to this day, that it's better to make the attempt and fail and learn from the mistake than it is to have never tried at all.
Oh, absolutely.
So, don't get me wrong, it's always going to be just don't have anxiety. No, that's impossible. But try to embolden yourself to make those mistakes and forge forward in your game mastering experience. One example I'll give is there's a time, and I don't know if we talked about this one in our Making Mistakes video, but there was an instance where Dan wanted to ride the back of a large-sized young black dragon in D&D on a mountaintop. Do you recall that? It's the time the dog died from the gas. Winston had a pet dog, and it was you guys were crossing the Star Mounts.
Oh, yes, I do remember.
And in D&D, there is like an optional rule in the Game Masters section where you can climb up on top of bigger creatures, but it's usually 2 size categories above. And if I had been better about making an improvisational ruling, the players would have had more fun in that moment. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that sometimes if the rules don't fit, the rule of cool and improvisation can actually improve. It can add butter to your toast, in a sense.
And in situations like that, if I'm going to err on either side, I generally tend to err on the side of the players.
Yeah,
because let's face it, your dead monsters don't actually have feelings. They don't care that they got waffled because you made a ruling in the players' favors. On the other hand, you're usually playing at a table with a group of your friends, and they're there to have a good time. So if you're going to play a little bit by the seat of your pants, and that is perfectly acceptable to do, just remember that when push comes to shove, it's probably a little bit better to lean ever so slightly in favor of the players.
Absolutely. Another note on memorization. It's honestly a lot of things that public school tries to teach you come into play, and even though part of my brain reels against it, then it's one thing to probably touch on is flashcards.
Yeah.
I have before, for certain rules or pieces of lore, used flashcards to memorize things.
Well, and to save time, you usually keep a Post-it note, or not a Post-it note, like a card. What am I thinking?
A Post-it. Oh, right. You mean like I have a shorthand thing of information that has like players.
Yeah,
AC.
our AC and any other relevant stats.
I will often keep a sheet of paper or a Post-it note or something behind the screen that has all of the players' AC, what their passive perception is, what their insight score is, a bunch of things that you would often want to hear from your players. That way I have it easily available. But I would say start with taking notes, and then if you're still having, like, after taking your notes on your second read through of a book, and I understand that, a lot of people are busy out there, and game mastering is a little bit of a dedication. It should not be.
It does require a little bit of work.
An imposing one. And I'll have some encouraging words after we talk about methods too, because one thing that Chris talked about is the when you run for more players that are experienced or more experienced than you, there is kind of an anxiety to that, which I was a drum major in high school for the marching band, and I was a sophomore, and I had a heck of a hard time, the fear of telling upperclassmen that what they're doing they need to augment.
Yeah.
As someone who is less experienced than them. I think that is very similar to a role-playing thing, where you might have equal or less experience to someone you're running a game for, and then that might be kind of intimidating. And that is okay. It's okay to be in awe of things like that, to feel a little bit of fear.
You can lean on those experienced players. Most of them probably, if they're experienced, have gone through the rule books, at least as far as the rules associated with their class, very possibly through the rules associated with everything. But lean on those guys. I mean, those are, like, the term rule lawyer gets a bad rap sometimes, because there's really two kinds of rule lawyers. There is the rule lawyers that are people that just know the rules, even though they're not GMing and they don't necessarily have to know the rules. And then there are the rule lawyers who basically are using those rules in an attempt to advantage their characters in ways that are largely selfish, basically. So I mean, if you've got players that know their way around the table, understand the rules for the system that you're playing, you don't have to memorize everything. And a lot of times you can ask them. Now, if they give you an answer and it sounds too good to be true, it might be worth looking up. But for the most part, they're gonna probably take at least enough of an interest in how their character works to understand those rules.
And I would say that if you have a group of players, if they are experienced, and you are putting in the effort to run a good game, like, you have dedication, you really care about your game, players that, like, good experienced players will pick up on that. And they will, you don't need to be afraid of stumbling, because even if they have there's one of two situations, right? Either one, they're only players and they don't know what it's like behind the screen.
Yep.
And so that means that they've never had the guts or care to do so. Or two, they've been behind the screen and know and empathize with you. Those are your two situations, right?
I think our group we're kind of lucky that way, because you and me have quite a bit of experience in game mastering, and at least a couple of the other players at the table that we have at least dabbled in it enough to understand what it's like sitting on that side of the table.
Oh, yeah. And if you have, assuming you've got good experienced players, they will and should be patient and understanding with you. And they know and recognize and are thankful for, even if they don't say it, they're happy to have a game where the game master cares. It is given given a big gosh darn Kahoot. Yeah, that's I'm trying not to swear there.
Trying to keep this PG if you can.
The players want to show up and have fun. And so if you are orchestrating that for them, they will be thankful, regardless of their experience level.
Yeah, they should understand that you are putting a fair amount of effort into this, that they don't have to. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, as a player, you're fortunate because you don't have to put in that multitude of work that the game master has to put in. And the game master typically enjoys it. That's why they keep doing it. But at the end of the day, it's still, if you're just talking total number of hours invested in your game night, As a player, your investment is almost entirely the actual game session.
Pretty much.
As a GM,
Have you already done character creation? Great, show up for the next
yeah,
half a
that's
year.
basically all you got to do is just show up and play. As a GM, you have to plan for this stuff. You gotta put stuff together, and I think an experienced group of players appreciates it, even if you don't realize that they do, and they probably aren't nearly as worried about it as you think they are.
Ah, that's true. It could be that it is something that you are the most stressed over. Now that doesn't mean that your stress isn't real. We recognize and understand that your stress is real, but try and keep those more positive notes in mind. The power of positive thinking, despite certain situations might be inappropriate, in this situation is a real tactic. Try at least make the attempt. Wake up every day and say, I put effort into game mastering so that my players can have fun, and they will respect it. Fake it till you make it, if you have to. Trick yourself into that positive mentality.
And generally speaking, if they keep showing up every week for the game session, that's usually a pretty good sign.
Yeah, that's
even
true.
if they're not singing praises, the fact that they're showing up means they're having a good time, because they could be doing something else with their time if they were.
And as a kind of an adjacent note to that, I read a piece of advice, actually, on Reddit, where someone was talking about how they had issues getting people to show up. Like, there was always one person missing. And some groups have, a lot of people showed up to that thread and talked about the show must go on rule, where if you're only missing one or two, like one player or something, or if at least half the group shows up, you play regardless, and suddenly everyone shows up.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, we're playing on this day, whether you're there or not, I think some groups, the ones that want to be there, they get a little bit of FOMO, a little bit of fear of missing out, and that's kind of how you'll through the sifter, you'll find
the transitive property.
Yeah, you'll find it through the sifter. You'll be able to weed out the players that really do want to be there and be a part of this experience that you're all building together.
Well, yeah, I mean, because if you have a player that really does care about the campaign, but tends to have, I don't know if I want to use the term selfish, but more of a selfish desire a game night, and they think, well, I could go play games or I could go out drinking. If they realize that you're not going to stop the world spinning so that they can go out and have a party night, they're probably going to show up.
Probably,
you know what I mean? They're going to start showing up. Now,
and if they don't want to be there,
and if they're consistently not showing up, replace them.
Yeah.
I mean, just find a new one.
Yeah, I mean, it's at first might be a cold statement to hear because perhaps this person is a close friend, and it can hurt when one of your friends does not want to show up to your game night anymore. But as long as you have a discussion about it, say, hey, I'm cool with you not wanting to be in the game. Maybe in the same way that other hobbies for some people come and go, game night can be like that too. It might have nothing to do with the quality of your game mastering.
Yeah,
it might be just a person is growing tired of game night. It might be someone might be going through depression can set in, and
some change in their life could have occurred that makes it so they have less time to do the game thing. I mean, don't be a dick and just throw them out of the group, but I mean, just sit them down and say, hey, listen, this has got to be a priority for everybody here.
Talk to your players like they're humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk to them like they're humans. But yes,
I mean,
as Lance said, lean on your experienced players. In summation, I would say we've covered. Read through the book twice, or at least read through all the rules twice.
Take notes, mostly for memorization purposes, but notes are nice.
Take handwritten notes if you can find the time to do so. Make flashcards of the rules that you think are important or the ones that you're having a particular problem with. We've mentioned the Game Master's screen. Don't forget that the Game Master's screen is there, because that's something that I have been guilty of.
Well, and I can understand, like, a lot of the times I feel like when I look up like the price of a Game Master screen, I'm like, this is just a cardboard with stuff printed on it. It's still worth it. I mean, it really is.
Almost always is.
Or print off the rules that you need and make your own homemade one if you want to get by, on the cheap. But have a Game Master screen. It's just always going to help you.
And, there's the whole fudging dice thing, being able to hide behind that. But honestly, it's really the information that is the best use out of it, because you've got all these, a good Game Master screen will have, all your combat rules, right? At least in broad strokes, all the combat rules. It might even have the price of an ale at the local tavern. my favorite one to see on there is like grappling rules or things like that. When it has all the conditions a game has, that's super great. And I have found myself about to stop a session and look up a rule, and then look up at the Game Master screen and remember, oh yeah, I have this nifty thing planted on the table in front of me that is a rules reference. So don't forget that it's there, because honestly, I have.
Most of the time, the Game Master screen, pretty much all the time, the Game Master screen is something that is manufactured and approved by the developers of the game. These are the things that they think are important enough that you should have a reference for them so you don't have to memorize them.
And if there are things that are not on the Game Master screen, or if there are things on the Game Master screen that you don't think is important, it's your Game Master screen. Write a note and tape it over the stuff that's useless.
Get you a sticky note. Write something on there, slap it over the section of the screen that you're not currently using. And
get yourself some Scotch tape and tape right over if you don't care about how long, maybe you're not using the travel times.
Yeah.
Tape right over the travel times and put how your paladin's smite function works right on the thing. I guess what I'm saying is get organized.
Yeah.
Find between note cards and putting extra notes or augmentations to your reference sheets. Knowing where the information is a good way to speed up things altogether.
Well, and you've done something, and this is kind of a more recent habit that you've developed. But I've noticed you've always got your laptop in front of you.
Yeah,
and you have the PDFs up.
Yeah, I have the PDFs up. In particular, it's easy with any game whose rules are online.
Well, I was just going to say, if you can get your hands on a PDF that's not just a scan, but a PDF that you can actually search through, and you have access to a laptop or a tablet or something that you can bring with you to game night, that makes it a lot easier to quick look up those rules.
For anyone who is not well-versed in computers, I actually don't know how Apple computers work, but on Windows, if you hit Control plus F in almost anything, whether it be a PDF or a website, it brings up a little window where you can type in what you want to search on the page.
Yep.
So even if you
It's
have
your find function.
Yeah, it's how it's basically the find on page function. And so whether you're using you might Control F in a PDF and look and just type in grappling. And if you're using like Adobe Acrobat Viewer, sometimes if it's a really long document, it can take a couple seconds to find all the instances of it. But also with Pathfinder, all the rules are online.
Yep.
There's an entire website where you can just go and Google.
Literally anything.
You can put in the search bar the rules and it'll bring it up.
Pathfinder 2 grappling rules. Boom.
So
right
if
there.
you have access to a laptop, now not everyone does. So if you don't have access to a laptop, make your own page of notes and rules.
Get a little analog with it.
Yeah, get a little analog, spiral notebook, anything, whatever you can, etch it into stone if you have to. Just augment your own rules that you have easy access to. That's on if the memorization tactics fail, like if repetition is not helping you remember stuff, get organized and make that information easy to access. Because at the end of the day, especially with the more systems you learn, they're gonna start to bleed together.
Yeah, Streetwise.
Yeah, I when we first ran Call of Cthulhu, I called for a Streetwise roll, which is not a skill in Call of Cthulhu. It does not exist. It exists in Traveler, which I was also learning at the same time.
Deadlands.
It's in Deadlands,
It
which
might be
is a game that we have,
Yeah.
the game that I started with, but it is not in Call of Cthulhu. So it's
You can get a little bit of game schizophrenia where you start to let bleed over from one game to another. Get to you.
yeah, it's the system reference scatterbrain essentially, and it will happen, and that's okay. So. In addition to making greater attempts to memorize, spending the time to do so, getting organized in the parts where you can't find the power to memorize, because that's okay. Everyone's brain works different. Some people are really good at memorizing things after reading them once or twice, and other people aren't.
I fall into the aren't camp.
Right, and that's why things like Game Master's screens and extra little notes can help. I keep an Excel spreadsheet of NPC names, but essentially the cast list for my campaign. That's another thing. I often forget NPCs, and I try to keep a spreadsheet that has them all on there, and I organize them by what their ancestry is, who their allegiance belongs to, where their current last known location was, and a little blurb about them.
If you make them up on the fly, write them down, because the players will ask, even if you thought that was a throwaway.
That's right. Anytime you have to make up an NPC, add them to your repertoire, wherever you're keeping information, like when you go to a play, it's got everyone who's playing who. Try to keep one of those somewhere. So just being organized in general will help you run your game flat out, full stop. That's it. Get organized for the things that you cannot memorize. Lean on your players. If you have experienced players, recognize the fact that the ones that want to be there will respect and appreciate your efforts.
For sure.
If you are showing dedication and care, it's not going to go unrecognized.
Absolutely.
You're the one putting in the time, and most players will know that. So, lean on those players. Anything else to add?
Just thanks to Chris for the email.
Yes. Thank you, Chris, for reaching out. This has been a lot of fun, answering an email right here on the podcast.
We'd like to do more of it. If
we
you've
would
got
like to do
subjects
more
you'd
of
like
it,
us
so
to talk about, please email.
Chris, tell your friends. Everyone else who's listening, tell your friends. Anyone who's listening who hasn't emailed us, which is most of you, send us an email with topics you would like to hear us discuss in varying degrees of detail and varying levels of tangential topics, getting off topic and things like that. But we will do always our best to try and touch on it. That said, we're going to wrap up here because that is last call. Bartholomew says it's time for us to finish our drinks and get the heck out of here. So the next time, we hope to see you next time that you stop in, but if you want to hear more of us or reach out to us, you can find the Record Button Production Group on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. This podcast and others held by the Record Button are found on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, YouTube, Spotify. And if you want to reach out to us directly, as we keep encouraging you to do, it is gmspeakeasyofficial@gmail.com. Thank you very much for your time. Lance, you got any final goodbyes?
Just get home safe.
That's right. Get home safe.